Okay, hi everyone. So as Elliot mentioned, I will be chairing this breakout room for this academic paper workshop session. Let's see. Maybe we can wait a couple of minutes, 1 minute more, and see if anybody else joins. Okay, great. So I think we can maybe start and maybe other people will join on the way. So our first paper today is by Benjamin Chen and his co-authors. So Benjamin, if you want to share your slides, I think you should be able to. Okay, great. And just as a reminder, you have 30 minutes and you can allocate your time in the way you like. So I would suggest we do like 20-25 minutes of presentation so we can have a bit of a discussion at the end. But yeah, the floor is yours. I think you're on mute.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Claudia. And it's a real pleasure to be here. The paper I'm presenting today is it's titled "Having Your Day in Robot Court," and this is a project between myself, Alexander Stremitzer from ETH Zurich, and Kevin Tobia from the Georgetown University Law Center. Now, this project is really about the procedural fairness of robot adjudication. And so we want to motivate it a little bit by discussing the idea of robot adjudication. At first, sight, at first thought, you might think this is a bit of a fantasy, right? The whole idea that robots can be adjudicating cases in a courtroom, that might still seem quite distant, but actually it's not that implausible. So it's not that unrealistic. So for example, this was a question posed to the Chief Justice of the United States in 2017 by Shirley Ann Jackson, a college president and theoretical physicist. And she was asking the Chief Justice, can you foresee a day when smart machines driven with artificial intelligence will assist with courtroom fact-finding, or more controversially, even judicial decision-making? And this is the Chief Justice's answer, right? And it's a day that's here. Now, of course, federal judges are not out of a job yet. Cases in the United States are still being decided by human judges, but the role of the artificial intelligence in the legal system is expanding. Okay, so right now they're really still being deployed as decision aids. In the United States, for example, artificial intelligence is being used to kind of predict recidivism, which goes into a pre-sentencing report that's then used as the basis for criminal sentencing, for example. In China, and in China as another example, artificial intelligence is being used to search for similar cases. So when judges decide a case, there's a similar case system that searches for similar cases and alerts judges if their decisions are seen as abnormal or as unusual. So this is the kind of role of artificial intelligence for the moment. But they're also poised to function as decision makers, right? Right now, not in such a big way, but the idea is certainly being discussed. So for example, in Estonia, there's the idea that for cases involving small sums of money, right, what are sometimes called small claims, these kind of claims are not huge, lawyers are not involved, maybe they could be adjudicated by robots, right? And so Estonia is actually actively working on a system of adjudication that will have AI function as decision makers for these kinds of small claims. And so technological advances make robot judging plausible. And the question is, is this something that we want? So there are two kinds of concerns we might have about having robots decide our cases, right? The first are legal doctrinal, right? Meaning, would a robot judge undermine the legal right to a fair trial? Right? Would a robot judge, violate fair trial standards of the European Convention on Human Rights? Right? These are some of the legal questions that one could ask, but we're not asking them in this project, right? Our project is really about a legal ethical question, right? Are robot judges procedurally fair? Right? Will they be perceived as legitimate? Right? You can put it in more behavioral terms. When people receive a decision from a robot judge, will they be inclined to resist that decision? Will they be more inclined to attack it? Right? That's one way to think about it behaviorally. And the way we study this question, right, there are two ways of looking at it, right? One is you could ask it as a philosophical question, right? So you could ask the question ex ante, a priori, right? Are robot judges fair or legitimate in some way? You can also ask it as a kind of more empirical sociological question, right? Will people resist robot judgments? Will they attack it, right? Like I described. And a long tradition in legal psychology actually studies it this way. And I want to be quite clear, right? This is not a philosophical question, right, about whether or not robot judges are inherently fair. Right? This is really empirical, psychological, sociological question. Will people accept this kind of judgments? And you might ask, well, shouldn't we really be interested in the normative question, right? Why are we looking at it empirically? Well, the normative question is important if we can figure it out, but perception also matters for compliance, right? So if we're going to be interested in policy, if we're interested in rolling out a robot judge for certain kinds of claims, we want to know, will people accept it, right? This is quite important for a policy point of view. And there's a recent argument that lay judgments of fairness are relevant in and of themselves, right? So even if to philosophers a certain process is fair, if the person subject to the process doesn't consider it as fair or legitimate, maybe there's a procedural harm. And so this is the motivating these are the motivating ideas for the studies we're going to conduct. More specifically, these are the questions we're going to ask, right? So most broadly, do ordinary citizens evaluate AI judges as more or less fair than human judges? All right. So if tomorrow we introduce AI judges, for certain kinds of claims, small claims perhaps, or even for very monumental decisions, right? Will they be seen as more or less fair? Right? Is perceived fairness context dependent, right? So the broad question, you might think the answer is, well, of course it depends, right? So the first thing is, does it depend on context, right? So would lay people see AI judges as more fair when the stakes are low than when the stakes are high, right? And in our experiment, we're going to contrast consumer refund, for example, you might think as kind of small stakes, $20, $50 kind of dispute against criminal sentencing, right? Where we're talking about the freedom of a citizen. People might also see AI judges as more fair when the decision turns on objective facts, right? Certain facts about the world that could be more accessible to computers or AI. Then if they turn on determination of subjective states of mind, for example, mental stress or duress. And again, this is a contrast that will come up in our experiment. Another question we might ask, right, when we think about judging, when we think about going to court, is the idea of having your day in court, right? And this is a very important part of the process, right? Many kind of cases can actually be resolved on the submissions, on the briefs, but oftentimes judges want a chance to hear the party, right? And parties often term this, as having their day in court. So can AI judges give parties a sense of being fairly heard as compared to human judges, right? So, as I suggested, a lot of times lay people think a hearing in front of a human judge, that's really an essential component of procedural fairness, right? But what if we gave them a chance to explain themselves to an AI judge, right? Will they see that as meaningful, right? Or will they see that as really meaningless? So that's another question we could ask. Yet another question we could ask when we think about AI judging and procedural fairness is the interpretability of decisions. And I will kind of unpack this a little bit when I discuss our experiment. But the basic idea is this. Many people have criticized AI, algorithms, machine learning algorithms, for example, as black boxes. Right? You don't really know, well, you know what's going in, right? You see what's coming out. You can't really tell what's happening in the middle, right? They're made out of neural networks of some kind, but you can't really explain how the inputs are kind of being converted into outputs. At least it's not easy, right? You can explain in a technical way, but not in an intuitively understandable way. But does that impair the fairness of AI judging, right? Is that more fatal? Is there a greater defect in an AI judge than a human judge, right? For example, suppose a human judge just gave a decision without too much reasoning. which does happen a lot of times, actually, more than you would think, even in the federal courts in the United States. Right? The federal courts in the United States, oftentimes there's just no time to give a reasoned decision. And many cases are being resolved with 5-page memorandum of disposition that don't really flesh out all the details of how the judges reached that decision. So, is the lack of interpretability, more of a problem for AI judging than human judging? So these are the questions we are interested in. And this is our project. I'm going to give you just the very quick takeaway at the beginning, and then I'll go through some of the details. But a very quick kind of takeaway overview of our project. We think this is some of the first evidence of ordinary people's evaluation of AI adjudication. We run 2 experiments, one involving 1,000 subjects, another one involving 5,000 subjects. And in the experiment, which is a vignette experiment, we get people to immerse themselves in certain scenarios and we ask them for their responses. We vary the type of adjudicator. So some people are going to be reading about human judge. Some people are going to be reading about AI judge. We vary the scenario. This is only for the first experiment. Some people are going to be reading about consumer refund case, some about pre-trial bail, and some people about sentencing. We vary, whether or not there's a hearing that's being described. And we vary whether the judges is interpretable, right? And then in a while, I'm going to show you the vignettes we use, but these are the kind of 4 dimensions along which we vary the vignette that subjects are reading, that they're being asked to respond to. And this is what we find, right? So up top, we find there's a perceived human AI fairness gap. Proceedings before human judges are seen as fairer, and this is pretty robust. We find it consistently throughout all the experiments. We find it pretty consistently throughout all the scenarios. But we also find a way to reduce this fairness gap, which is a little interesting. For the time being, we've called it algorithmic offsetting. Maybe that's a better term. But the idea is pretty simple. And the idea is that making decisions interpretable and giving people the opportunity for hearing actually increase fairness ratings, right? Both for human and for AI judges. And so if you think that these kind of features are not really available for human processes, but could readily be incorporated into AI processes, then you could add them to AI processes, and that would compensate for this fairness gap. That's the basic idea. And I'll return to this at the end. And finally, this is less from the experiment itself than it is from a mediation analysis of the experiment. We find that the procedural fairness advantage of humans is really more related to hard as opposed to soft factors that are distinctively human. What does that mean? Well, we find that insofar as there is this fairness gap, the factors that explain them seem to be more related to things like accuracy and comprehensiveness of the decision, rather than the sense of being heard, the sense of being understood. Okay, and this is going to be quite interesting when we think about how we could, for example, implement machine adjudication and have it be accepted by the parties that are subject to it. Okay, so now I'm going to go a little more into the into the design of the experiment and the data. All right, so this is the first study that we did. Its n is equal to 1,000 here. We have about 1,000 subjects. And there are kind of 4 dimensions. All right, so this is 3 by 2 by 2 by 2 factorial design, right? So you can just start from the left, right? If you think about it, you're a subject, you're coming into this experiment, you could be randomized to 1 of 3 scenarios, okay? So you could be reading about consumer refund, you could be reading about pre-trial bail, or you could be reading about sentencing, okay? And you don't get to choose, right? You're basically randomized in 1 of these 3 scenarios. When you start reading the vignette, right, you learn certain facts about the case. Everyone reads the same facts, right? But some people are told that the decision maker is human. Some people are told it's an algorithm, right? Again, this is random. This is the second factor along which randomization occurs. People are told the outcome, and then they find out certain things about the process, right? So some of them find out there is a hearing or no hearing, right? Again, this is randomized. This is the fourth one on the. This is the one right here, and they're also told, about whether or not the decision is interpretable, and I will make that clear when it'll be clear when we see the vignette what that means. All right, but people who are told that the decision is interpretable are told, for example, that the results can be replicated, that follows a very simple tree process. People who are told that the decision is not interpretable they're told basically that a number of factors are considered, but it's not easy to kind of explain how these factors shift the final outcome. Okay, so just to be clear, right, you get randomized to one of these three scenarios. So you read a vignette, right, based on one of these three scenarios, and the vignette changes depending on which one of these two conditions you're in, which one of these two conditions you're in, and which one of these two conditions you're in. Right. So this is the consumer refund scenario, and I won't go through the entire vignette. The vignette is actually quite long, and it's split up over several pages in our design. But the key thing you have to take away is that we start off from the consumer refund scenario as the kind of lowest stakes, least controversial scenario. Okay, this is basically a dispute over a camera, whether consumer is going to get a refund for a camera, and the dispute really turns on whether there's a smudge mark on the camera lens and whether the photographs took using the camera were discolored. Okay, photographs taken using the camera were discolored. So you see the dispute really turns on, you could say, objective facts. Right, and the stake is really just, well, compared to the rest, it's just $2,500, right? That's the price of the camera. So that's, maybe the easiest case for machine adjudication. The second scenario is pretrial bail. Okay, it's whether or not someone's going to get bail when they're arrested, and not getting bail means you have to stay in prison or in jail from the time you're arrested until the time of trial. Okay, so the factors that have to be considered here are flight risk, right? The risk that the defendant would flee before the trial, and so-called further offenses risk, right? The risk that the defendant would commit further criminal offenses before the trial. And you see, this is in a sense a little less objective, right? Than whether or not there's a smudge mark, whether or not the photographs taken were discolored. Okay, so this is a little more you could say subjective in a sense, right? It's not so easy to predict this. It's not a matter of just taking in pixels and giving an output or label. Right, and the stakes are slightly higher, right? So the stakes are really about someone's freedom. Okay, it's not just about $2,500. And the last scenario we have is custodial sentencing. Okay, and this you can think of as in a sense the most subjective, the highest stakes. Intuitively, you might think of this as the toughest case for machine adjudication, for robot judging. Right, the factors here, well, the facts here basically revolve around an accident. Well, you could call it accidental, but it revolves around in the sense that unintentional killing during a robbery. And the factors for the sentencing are the nature of the crime, the character and history of the defendant, right? For example, whether or not the defendant has a criminal history, right? And importantly, whether the criminal defendant was under great personal stress or duress when committing the crime. Okay, and this is really not that easily ascertained, but you really have to look into the mind of the defendant to some extent. You have to assess the defendant's credibility, the defendant's kind of truthfulness. And you might think this is much harder for a machine than just figuring out whether or not there's a smudge mark on a camera lens. Okay, and the stakes are also higher. The difference between the lowest and the highest possible sentence is 10 years. Okay, so the stakes here are 10 years in prison. And these are the three different scenarios that subjects in the first experiment could be randomized to. And in all scenarios, let me just say the decision when it gets defended. Okay, and the reason for that is that most of the time that's when people might think a process is unfair, right? Of course, if the result is favorable, it might still be unfair. People are less likely to complain. When the result is unfavorable, most of the time that's when people look into the procedural fairness of the adjudicative process. Okay, so that's the scenarios. And like I said, once people are assigned to a particular scenario, then they read a vignette, they read certain facts, and the facts they read, the details they get vary depending on the conditions they're assigned to. Okay, so the first big condition is it a human or an AI judge? So for example, if you're randomized to the bail condition, and you're also randomized to the human judge, then you'll read the following, right? You'll read that in the state where John was arrested and charged, John is the protagonist in all of our scenarios. Bail decisions are made by a judge, right? These judges are very experienced and can predict flight and further offenses risk to a very high degree of accuracy. Among other things, the judge already has information about John's background, his previous convictions, and potential extenuating circumstances, if any. If you get assigned to the bail scenario, but the AI judging condition, right? Then you learn that bail decisions are made by an algorithm, okay? And we try to make things as similar as possible between human and AI judging, okay? So we also tell subjects, the algorithm, is pretty good, right? Employs, advanced machine learning techniques, right? They are told, right, the algorithm can predict flight and further offenses risk to a very high degree of accuracy, right? That's what was also said about the human judge. And we also say the algorithm has information, about the things that in the other scenario, the other condition, the human judge also has. All right. So the whole idea is we try to keep things the same. The only difference is this time, if it's the AI condition, we tell people it's an algorithm, but otherwise we try to keep things as similar as possible between the AI and the human judge. All right. So this is the first condition. The second condition is whether or not there's a hearing. Right. So again, this is an example from the consumer refund scenario with an AI judge and a hearing. Right. This is what subjects read. Right. Before an algorithm makes a decision, sometimes there is an arbitration hearing, but sometimes there's not. Right. In John's case, there is an arbitration hearing. John has an opportunity to present his case in person. The hearing allows John to explain why the camera was damaged and therefore should be refunded by speaking to a computer that transcribes his speech for consideration by the algorithm. Through this hearing, the algorithm is able to evaluate John's credibility and emotions. Right. So this is the vignette with a hearing. Without a hearing, right, it begins the same way, but we tell the subject there is no arbitration hearing. Right. So in John's case, there's not an arbitration hearing. Right. John does not have an opportunity to present his case in person. The hearing would have allowed John to explain to the arbitrator why the camera was damaged and therefore should be refunded. And through this hearing, the arbitrator would have been able to evaluate John's credibility and emotions. So again, the same kind of information is being given. I just want to, just as a technical point, right, the reason why we mention all this stuff here is because if we don't, right, sometimes subjects may just assume there is a hearing, right? So if in the no hearing condition, we just leave out the entire passage, subjects may just assume there is no hearing. So here we're quite explicit, right? We tell them that sometimes there's an opportunity for hearing, but not here, right? And then we tell them what's being omitted or left out because there was not a hearing. Okay, so these are the vignettes for the hearing or no hearing condition. And finally, whether or not the decision is interpretable or not interpretable. And I believe this is the very last paragraph they see, okay? So before they are asked for their responses, this is the very last paragraph they see. If subjects are kind of randomized to the interpretable condition, right, they're told that, well, the decision maker's reasoning is rigorous, it's also easy to understand, okay? All factors were considered using a flowchart that asks at each stage whether a particular criteria is satisfied. It would therefore be possible for John or anyone else to figure out how much each factor mattered to the decision maker's ultimate decision. Moreover, it would be possible for someone else to replicate the decision maker's reasoning to see how a change in any of his factors impacts the sentencing decision, right? And in this vignette, we've kind of implemented certain common definitions of what it means for a decision to be interpretable, right? So for example, you can have a very good sense of how the inputs affect the outputs, right? That's one kind of operative definition, right? You can also replicate the process, right? You can manually just go through the steps and see that the decision maker followed the steps correctly. Okay, so that's another way of operationalizing the idea of interpretability. If subjects are randomized to the not interpretable condition, then they get something different, right? Again, they're told that the reasoning is rigorous, right? But now they're told it's not easy to understand. Okay, all the factors were considered, but given the complex nature of the decision-making process, it's not possible to describe in simple terms how the decision was produced. All right, so here again, I want to emphasize, we tell our subjects the reasoning is rigorous, right? The only difference is, how easy is it for human to grasp the thought processes of the decision maker. Okay. So those are the different conditions, right? And what are the results? Well, at a very high level, so we do find a human AI fairness gap, right? This is what I indicated at the beginning. And you see what you see here on the slide are the average fairness ratings. Okay, so for example, in blue here on the left, these are the subjects assigned to the refund condition and got a human judge, right? And this is the average ratings they gave in terms of the procedural fairness of the decision, right? They were asked, do you think that the process was fair? right? And it's a 1 to 7 Likert scale, okay? So it's a 1 to 7 Likert scale. And so, for example, for here, you see it's around 3.6, right? And it's lower when it's lower when it's an AI judge, okay? It's lower when you have an algorithm that's producing the decision. And this kind of surprised us. This surprised us because you would think that consumer refund case, that's the kind of case that would be perfect for an algorithm, right? It's just a matter of looking at some pixels and deciding if the object is damaged or not. But nevertheless, even here, people felt that the AI kind of led process was less fair. Same thing for bail, right? You see the gap. And the same thing for criminal sentencing, right? So across all three scenarios, we do see humans having this so-called procedural justice advantage, okay? A process that is led, that is kind of decided by human judge is seen as being more procedurally fair than, the exact same thing, but done by an AI judge. So this is the first finding.
Benjamin, just to let you know that you have a couple of minutes left.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. So let me speed up a little bit. Maybe I'll skip the second one. Let me speed up a little bit. When we look at the conditions of hearing and interpretability, right, we do see that a hearing helps, right, and we also see that interpretability helps. So all that is pretty standard, and we will replicate that in the second study in case I don't get to that. But what's more interesting are the interactions. And so we actually ran a regression looking for interactions. And again, this is not the problem, but we find something quite curious, right? So it seems like there's some kind of interaction, right? It seems like when there's a hearing, it matters less that there's a hearing when it's an algorithm that's doing the decision making. But when we're talking about interpretability, it seems like the fact that the decision maker is an algorithm matters. Okay, so interpretability matters more for algorithmic decision makers, and hearing matters less for algorithmic decision makers. Okay, and this motivates the second study, which I'll get through pretty quickly. The key thing about the second study, we only use one scenario, which is the Bell scenario, and we have a sample size of 5,000. Okay, because based on simulations, sample size of 5,000 was going to give us enough power to detect interaction effects. Okay, so in a nutshell, I'm going to be quick now. Exact same experiment, except only one scenario, the Bell scenario, and 5,000 people. And this is what we find. Let me just take you through the high level results. The high level results basically are, again, humans have this advantage. Again, having a hearing helps, right? Interpretability helps, but we find no evidence of interaction effect. Okay, so the fairness gap is replicated, and I'm happy to discuss any of this in Q&A. The hearing effect is replicated, but we don't actually find any interaction effects. Okay, so whether or not the decision maker is an algorithm or a human, the same effects at play. Okay, let me skip this and go to the implications. Right, so that's kind of cool, right? But what do we take away from this? Why is this study interesting? On the one hand, we do find, what people have long suspected, right? Many of the objections in the literature are to the fairness, procedural fairness of machine adjudication. And we do find that in people's intuitions, lay people do object. Well, they don't object, but they view machine adjudication as less fair than human adjudication, right? So this could be a challenge if robot judges are ever going to kind of take over most of the judging that happens today. But what's interesting also is that hearing and interpretability matters for both human and AI judges alike. Okay, and there is no real big difference in terms of the hearing or the interpretability effect, whether it's a human or an AI decision maker, right? So this gives rise to this idea called algorithmic offsetting, right? And this is our idea. The idea is, there are certain resource constraints when we're talking about human judges, right? Not every case really gets a hearing. But with machines, we could potentially, for example, give everyone a hearing, right? And you could think that in that scenario, right, when a machine, when a process in front of a machine is interpretable, where there's the opportunity for hearing, machine adjudication could be seen as being as procedurally fair as human judging. Now, I just want to caution everyone, right? This is a little Machiavellian, right? There is, of course, the objection that, just because people feel it's fair doesn't necessarily mean it's so. right? But in terms of implementation, right, if we're interested in compliance, in people's kind of subjective judgments of the process, this matters, right? And our findings suggest there is a way of offsetting this fairness gap. Finally, right, and this is the results I didn't present, we did some mediation analysis, and that suggests that insofar as there is this robust, enduring advantage of humans over AI when it comes to procedural fairness, it's not really related to kind of soft human factors like understanding of the defender's position or feeling that the defender had a voice. And this really surprised me, to be honest. It seems like most of the gap is being explained by people's perception of the accuracy of the decision maker, of the comprehensiveness of the decision. So people are thinking that humans more fair because they think a human is more accurate or more comprehensive. And insofar as this is the case, you could think that if an algorithm were in fact more accurate, but people didn't perceive it as so, a very good way of kind of closing the fairness gap could be just raising people's awareness, showing people, right, that AI, for example, is capable of producing decisions that are as, if not more accurate than humans. All right, so thank you, Claudia. You know, I'm really sorry I went over the time. These are the brief takeaways. You want to have a quick look. I'm very happy to respond to questions, you know, objections, comments, and suggestions for future work. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Benjamin. Very, very interesting work. Now I think we have Tobias presenting his work. So if Benjamin, you can stop sharing your screen and maybe Tobias can start sharing. Okay, great. So again, you have like until 10 almost, but you can finish a bit earlier if you want to leave space for the discussion. The floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning. When I was 16 years old, I spent a year in France with a host family, and I went to a French school. And at the beginning, this was a very intimidating experience because I found myself in a new family I didn't know and with people I didn't know. I knew I had to stay there the whole year. And there were many things that I had trouble understanding, and not only because my French was very bad at the time, but it just was in general rather intimidating. And one occasion where this happened quite often was that I often helped my host mother in the kitchen when she was cooking. And many times I didn't understand what I should do or what she told me to do, but I also was too shy to ask. So I just pretended that I understood what she told me in French, which I did not. And then I came up with my own idea how to mix the ingredients, and most of the time it was wrong. So she encouraged me to just ask, even if I felt uncomfortable with it, and even if I had to ask all the time. And this actually helped me a lot. So I spent a wonderful year in France, and my cooking skills, they also greatly increased. And in the meantime, I started doing a PhD in economics, and I specialized in environmental economics. And in environmental economics, a major problem we are dealing is how to reduce energy consumption of households. The usual approach that economists take into finding out how households can reduce energy consumption is actually quite similar to the approach that I took to cooking back when I was 16 in France. You make up a theory and then you try it out. If it works, that's good. If it doesn't work, you have to start all over again. The alternative would be to simply ask people why they do something or why they do not do something. After all, people usually know and have a good idea why they made a decision. Why did they buy the Tesla instead of the SUV, or why did they install a heat pump in their house instead of an oil heating system? And this is also a very intuitive approach, because if I had a coffee with any of you, that's how we would proceed. And it works very well for one person. It probably also works for 10 or 20 people, but policymakers are interested in a lot more people. So is there a way to just ask several thousand people and to use this information in a scientific way? And that's what this presentation will be about. So first, I will talk about the general goals and methods in a more scientific way. Then I will talk about the data that we collected to conduct this experiment. I will then pass to more technical part where I explain how to classify open text answers. And in the last part, I analyze the heterogeneity of these answers such that policymakers can use them. So the background of this paper is that in environmental economics and in environmental policy, there are very ambitious energy efficiency targets, but they are systematically missed. And the reason for this is what we often call the energy efficiency gap. The energy efficiency gap shows the disparity between available energy efficient technology and its adoption. So it shows a lack of technology adoption. For instance, there are many efficient heating systems for homes, but people, they just don't buy them. And there are a lot of reasons why people do not adopt these new technologies. There are several market barriers and failures. They are all interconnected. It's very context specific, and they also change over time. And all this makes it very hard for researchers to pin down the energy efficiency gap to specific determinants and barriers. Whole home retrofitting is a very good example to demonstrate that, because engineering estimates consistently show that retrofitting is the most cost-effective way to invest in energy efficiency. So this means you get a more energy efficient house and you actually save money because you consume a lot less energy. However, these engineering estimates, they do not account for hassle costs and the associated benefits of such a retrofits, such as greater comfort. And the reason why whole home retrofitting is an interesting case study is because in Switzerland, the building sector accounts for 1/3 of the entire greenhouse gas emissions. So it has a huge potential to benefit from technology adoption. That's why the questions I'm going to ask here are first, what are the key barriers and determinants of investment into energy efficiency? And second, what policies would households favor? And what is their link with the barriers and determinants of investments? Of course, these questions, they are already around for a long time, and there are two traditional approaches in answering them. First one is non-choice based, and the second one is choice based. Non-choice based methods, they usually use a survey with well-defined options of barriers and determinants that the analyst thinks households might face. Choice-based methods, on the other hand, present respondents with hypothetical choices and then uses their decisions to infer different barriers and determinants of that choice. Both of these methods have problems. On the one hand, you have priming. So if a respondent is presented with several options that were predefined by the researcher, it could be that the respondent just answers what the researcher wants him or her to answer. And another one is the analyst's elicitation bias. That's basically a lot of the barriers and determinants that are in the study are only there because the analyst came up with it. And if you asked people without priming them, they would never even think about those things. Our third approach is different. We use so-called narratives to elicit preferences. So narratives are just people's personal stories about what they do and what they believe. And it consists in just asking people what they think and let them speak, or in this case, write their mind. And the idea is very intuitive. The implementation is a bit tricky because if you have several thousand written text answers, you need to find a way to process them. You cannot read them all because it's just too much and it doesn't have much external validity. So that's where we use artificial intelligence, because new methods in natural language processing allow us to turn these individual narratives into quantifiable metrics for household preferences. And to do so, we conducted a survey in the canton of Zurich in early 2020, just before COVID started, with single-family homeowners. We had about 3,500 respondents out of almost 17,000 invitations. And the survey consisted of several open-ended questions on renovation motivations and mirroring closed questions. So we made sure to have a comparison. We asked closed questions where people still had to check boxes to get a proxy how different the answers are actually from the open-ended questions. Just to give you a brief introduction in what this survey population looked like, we differentiate between takers of retrofits and non-takers. Takers conducted an energy efficiency retrofit within the past 5 years or plan to do so in the next 5 years. And they are roughly the same if you look at income, tenant age, building age, the floor size, and also the rental value of the building. So in Switzerland, homeowners have to know the approximate rental value of their building for tax reasons. So there is not that much of a difference that can help us to explain why some people renovate and why others do not. And to give you a more precise view how this would look in a traditional analysis, you take all these variables and you just look what is correlated with taking the decision to renovate versus not. So you put it all into a regression. We see some variables are negatively associated with renovating. When they have a negative coefficient, some are associated positively. So we see, for instance, that older tenants, they are less inclined to renovate, which makes sense because if you are old, your horizon that you will live in your house is still rather small. But it doesn't help us so much to know the real reasons why some people renovate and why others do not. And for this reason, we turn to narratives. The idea is to ask directly respondents why they renovated or not in an open and in a closed way. The closed question is a multiple choice question with predefined answers that are different for takers and non-takers because barriers are different than determinants. The open question was the following. Describe the reasons why you decided or not decided to carry out an energy efficient retrofit. Please write a short text of about 4 sentences. And at the time when we conducted this survey, no one else has ever done such a big survey with so many respondents and open-ended survey questions. So it was very new for us, and we didn't know if people were actually going to answer to these questions or if they do not want to write and will leave our survey. And even if they answered, we were not sure if the answers are actually meaningful or if it's just noise. We were very positively surprised that people, they did answer and the answers were very meaningful. Here to give you a few examples. So the first one did not renovate. And that person wrote, the house is well insulated. The windows are still good. The oil consumption is not enormous and the heating isn't old yet. So this means the home is already energy efficient. The second one did do a renovation to reduce the carbon footprint. The house dates from the 1970s and was poorly insulated. The renovation also improved the quality of the rooms. The independence from oil is an additional benefit. So here we have several reasons. One is environmental concerns. Another one is that the house was old and parts had to be replaced. And also comfort plays a role. The third one writes, the heating system was an oil heating system, which we considered no longer up to date. The new system of an air-to-water heat pump combined with solar panels is efficient and comparatively inexpensive to operate. So here we see we have financial reasons and also replace broken parts. At the end of the survey, we asked a last additional open question on policy preferences. Here we asked the same question to all respondents without a closed counterpart. And the question was, we would now like to ask for your opinion. What approaches do you think the public sector should promote to encourage energy efficient construction and renovation for households living in Switzerland? And here we also got very interesting answers. Here is an example. Creating uncomplicated incentives with little bureaucracy. Offer advice, advertisement for good projects. So that respondent wants more information and less bureaucracy. Now the question is how to quantify these text answers. So there is already literature that deals with finding topics in text, the latent Dirichlet allocation, structural topic model, etc. And we tried these methods, but they gave unclear results. They were not able to provide topics for these text answers that were meaningful for us. For this reason, we partly did a manual classification based on keywords, but in a way that is reproducible and that can be extended to new text. So first we removed the stop words, we pre-processed the data. Next, we matched each unique word with the German fast text word embeddings. So word embeddings, they show how semantically close words are. For instance, pencil and paper, they're very close, but pencil and cloud are not close. And the word embedding gives you actually a number for each possible combination, how close words are. Based on these distances, we clustered nouns, adjectives, words, and adverbs separately using cosine similarity and the k-means clustering. And the number of clusters isn't very important. It's just large enough to allow for a second clustering, which is then done manually, where words of these clusters are picked and put into topics for determinants and barriers that match the categories from the closed questions when possible, or we created new topics when this was not possible. So here's graphical illustration how we proceeded. So you start with all the text answers and you do the first clustering that is automatic and uses all the unique words. Because we use these word embeddings, the words in the clusters, they are kind of similar. They are not perfectly similar. That's why you need to do a second clustering, but it's similar enough that it's possible to do this manually with many, many words. So we see bureaucracy, states, jungle. So in German, you often talk about the bureaucracy jungle. They are all kind of similar. And next one, funding program, project, they are also kind of similar, but it's not enough to get a meaningful topic. So the next step has to be done manually, where we create the bureaucracy topic and pick these words manually. And then we have a topic with words and we can use it as a dictionary to classify answers. And if we take the example from before, the algorithm will see that it contains the word bureaucracy. Bureaucracy also is contained in the bureaucracy topic. So this answer is clustered in the bureaucracy topic. It also contains advertisement. So it also will be clustered in the second topic that is advertisement. To give you an idea how well this worked, here you can see the number of answers. So we got a lot less barriers than determinants because many people actually renovated. We had very little attrition. Most people, they did not opt out. And the number of words was around 20 or 25. And in the last two rows, you see all the unique words and the words that we used out of these unique words to define the topics. So we didn't use all the words that were in the text corpus. And now to show you some of the results. So here we see the barriers to energy efficiency and the determinants. The first column is always what we got in the open question. It's the percentage of answers, and the right one is closed. And we see that these numbers, they are different. For the barriers, for instance, they are different. There were more people who wrote that the building is already energy efficient than those who checked the box. Old age also emerged as a new topic that we didn't think about. The determinants are even more interesting because if you compare the percentages for open and closed, they are not only very different, but also the ranking is different. Because for the closed questions, the most important determinant is to reduce the ecological footprint and to increase comfort. But if we look at the difference between the closed and the open question, we see that it is decreased by 70%. So many people, they check the box that they renovate out of environmental concerns, but if you ask them to actually write a text about that, very few will do that. Most people wrote that they replace broken elements in their home. To turn to the policy preferences, here we didn't have this differentiation between closed and open, but we got also broad topics that made a lot of sense. So many people want less bureaucracy, higher subsidies, more information, and also standards for buildings so that you are just not allowed to do something else. Many also favor pollution taxes. We also see a difference between takers and non-takers of retrofit, and we classified these broad topics into even broader topics that are either market, non-market, or behavioral oriented. So now that we saw how these narratives can be classified into topics for barriers, determinants, and policy preferences, in the next step, I'm interested in the heterogeneity. So how do they connect? Which policy preferences are connected to which barriers? So people who express a certain barrier also have certain policy preferences. And we see that for the barriers, this doesn't work too well. Also due to the rather small sample size. But if we go to the determinants where we have a much larger sample, we see that a pattern emerges. So respondents who stated that they renovate to replace old parts of the building, they have a preference for market-oriented policy measures and non-market oriented. So to see what they are, non-market is essentially less bureaucracy, market are more subsidies. So they want less bureaucracy, more subsidy, because they have the necessity to replace old parts. If we look at those who renovate out of environmental concerns, those are the people who stated this in an open way. They prefer behavioral policies, and behavioral policies are more information and more energy efficiency standards. So we see here that different patterns emerge. And if we summarize them, we can get clusters and targets for policies. So first, on a aggregate level, on a big level, we have takers versus non-takers, and there we don't see so much. We have a lower age for takers, but no other differences in observables, and also not really in the policy preferences. But we already know why some people renovate and why not, because we just ask them. So that's why we can go more granular into the barriers and determinants. And if we look at the barriers, two groups emerge. Those whose house is already energy efficient. There's no difference in income or age. These people tend to have a higher educational level and they have no particular policy preference. Then there are respondents who renovate out of financial constraints. Unsurprisingly, these respondents have a lower income, but also no difference for policy preferences. If we look into determinants, we have three groups. The first one
sorry,
renovates.
Tobias, just to let you know that you have like roughly 3 minutes left.
It's the last slide. We have those who renovate out of necessity to replace old parts. They live in older buildings and are younger. They prefer policies that reduce bureaucracy and have higher subsidies. Next, we have people who renovate out of financial opportunity to save money. They have a weekly higher income and a lower educational level, but no particular policy preferences. And last, we have those who renovate out of environmental concerns. They have a high income, they donate it to environmental organization, and they strongly favor policies such as information campaigns and environmental standards. So in conclusion, the main reason for energy efficiency investments are classic market features: state of the building, building age, tenant age, financial means. Co-benefits are also not as important as they initially seem, because only a core of 25% of the respondents value these co-benefits, which are the increase in comfort and the environmental concerns. But a major opportunity for policy targeting is renovation out of environmental concerns, which we learned out of the narratives. And in the presentation, we saw that these narratives, they can help us a lot to know what people think and why they do something by just asking. It's essentially the same principle that helped me when I was 16 and learned cooking in France to improve my cooking skills. And just asking can also help policymakers. So with these words, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And if there are any open questions, just ask.
Thanks a lot, Tobias. This was a very interesting work as well. So unfortunately, we are right at the hour, so we should reconvene with the main room where the conference is continuing. But thanks a lot to both Benjamin and Tobias for presenting their great work. And I would suggest that if anybody has any questions or comments or feedbacks that they want to give to the presenters, if that's fine with them, they can reach out to them and discuss it. Okay, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you back in the main room.